Hello everyone and welcome back to the Game Emporium, where some friends have gathered around the table to talk about board games, and we are here, finally,
yeah.
to talk about the greatest games of all time, as per our opinion, about 18 months or so.
Maybe,
I don't
yeah.
know. When did we
It wasn't even
when
that
did we
bad.
do
Nah,
this?
it's not that bad. It's not that bad. It's more like,
There's the games we've played in the last 2 years. I
yeah,
think.
basically.
It was 18 months when we started doing this, and that was July when we ran
Yeah.
this list.
Yeah. But,
So,
hey, Clutch,
yeah.
we're coming in just before Christmas, just before the end of the year. Just there it in, sneaking it in at the end of the year.
My name is Luke, that is Ross.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's what we got this time around. So we're going to go from our 5 to 1, picking up our best, favoritist games of all time, not including the ones that we've played in the last 6 months or so.
Yeah.
Because there are definitely games, I think we talked about this before, there are definitely games that we've played since we've done these lists that would probably make it into our top
Yeah.
20 at least.
I think
Like
there's
Windmill Valley, I think for both of us
Yes.
is
Yeah.
up there. And there's a few games that have probably dropped out
I think so.
since we've
Yeah.
done the list.
Yeah, because as well, just as a reminder, because I think I said this right at the very beginning, obviously a while ago when we started recording these, is a lot of these games as well. I hadn't had an opportunity to do a lot of playing of games necessarily, so
Yes.
quite a few of them on the list were like, "Oh, this is a game I like. Think I'm gonna really enjoy. I have fond memory of it, or I've played it once, but I want to play it again." And there's all that sort of stuff. So there's a bit of that in this.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm a little bit more confident maybe with sort of decision making around that. So.
I like that my copy of Jester Robin Hood is just there, jauntily in the background of your shot.
I just
Quite amusing for me.
it's the it's a bit
It's the only
of a
space it
squeeze,
fits.
but it's the only space you can fit. So yeah, I need a bit
It's
of
fine.
that.
I know you're going to play with your dad over Christmas, so
Very
that'll
excited
be
to.
good
Very
times.
excited to.
Yeah, interesting. All right, let's get straight into this with our number 5.
Me first, then. Okay. Hey, right. This is a absolute staple of my collection and of usually my top whatevers for games, and I think it's mostly. No, you know what? I'll reserve what I'm about to say actually for in a minute. But anyway, here we go. So get my brain into gear. It's Cartographers, which is just like
Oh yeah, classic.
such
Classic.
a good game. So, just a very quick recap. You have a lovely little gridded map. You flip a card over. On that card has a polygonal shape and a terrain type. You then draw that terrain type on your map, and you're trying to satisfy some like global scoring conditions, basically for everyone, public scoring conditions. So how you place it obviously depends on how many points you're going to get, etc., etc. But it's so good, it's so fun because you could, if you really wanted to, you could commit quite hard to making a very pretty map. Really, really good puzzle behind it. Really easy to teach people. Plays up to like loads of people. So yeah, I just forever is going to be up there. I think until I can find a roll and write, an X and write, or a verb and verb, until I can find one which really, really tops it. Reason why I was umming and ahhing a second ago is because I'm about to say I think this is like the best roll and write that I've got. But there is a game which is sort of like that, which sits slightly above it actually. So that's why I undernode at the beginning. But anyway, really, really good game. Really, really good game. Got quite a few of the expansions. I think there's even more now, where they've got like the different map layouts, and you've got like so one of them has like a volcano in it. You add stuff like monsters, like zombies, which are quite cool because you have like monsters and you pass your sheets, and then your opponents like draw some baddies basically on your sheet to give you some negative points. And there's a few in there like zombies, which kind of propagate each round if you don't close them off, and you have heroes and all this other stuff. So it's quite good. It's like modular, so they can kind of expand on it quite easily, I guess. Yeah, really, really enjoy it.
Yeah, I like Cartographers as well. I had it at 25 for me because I played a lot of it, and there were other games that have come up that have taken my interest more. But it is an absolute staple, I think, in a collection. As you say, there's so many different expansions. There's the variety in the scoring because you have each season scores 2 different objectives, so you can focus on those. I like that the scoring objective for season A is also the last one that you will score because it's going to be, by the point you get to it, it's probably going to score pretty well, but it's going to score terribly in the first round. So, a lot of fun stuff to do, a lot of extra bits and pieces to go in there. The only thing that I would ding it for is the Heroes expansion, just because the heroes themselves are annoying, because they always seem to come out after or before the monsters.
I feel like there's a home rule that you could do, or house rule you could do in there, and homebrew and house rule I was mixing there. You can do in there where like you get the card and then it's like reserved for later, and maybe you can place it later, because it is frustrating that because the ordering is you might get your hero come out and then you get your monster, and that's just kind of like a bit annoying.
Yeah.
But or you do it so. I don't know, maybe this is the rules. I don't think it is. Where you place the hero, then those areas are protected, but then obviously whoever's placing the monsters won't place them in that area. But maybe you can like do some coverage there. I don't really know. So yeah, it is a bit lackluster, but everything else from a kind of expansion perspective is really good. Yeah.
But it's easy enough to just not play with the heroes, just take those out.
Yeah.
Cool monsters.
Yeah.
So my number 5 in talking about heroes is kind of interesting, because it is a game where heroes are going about on an adventure, where there's a big storytelling element that's going along, and this is Freelancers.
Yes.
So Freelancers is an interesting game, because it's a game which basically takes the tropes of an RPG kind of storytelling game and brings it into a board game solution, where you are going around, you are undertaking challenges, you've got your 2 character sheets of effectively your race and your class that sort of mashes together. You can run around, do all sorts of different things, and basically go through these challenges. It's 3-player minimum, which is a little bit annoying, because it would be nice to play it, but I guess there's a lot of admin that you need to do in order to keep track of things. Like, there's a bunch of different roles that are split out amongst the players, and if you're playing with 3, everyone has to have multiple roles, which is sometimes tricky to keep track of. But the story element is great, because you've got all this voice acting that's thrown into the app that tells you along the story through this map, and the choices that you make along the way really can influence things. The story that we played through, the first time we ever played it, we played through the story and we got to this wizard who wanted to go and avenge against this dragon that he wanted to get this vengeance on because he'd done something to his family. And we find out just at the end of the story, as the dragon has killed the wizard and his dying breath, we find out what happened to it, and it just made us laugh so much because it was completely unexpected. Which I will not spoil. I might tell Ross off camera because I probably wouldn't play the version. I may have done already.
No, or you may have half spoiled, I think, before, because you like doing it. This is a game, though, that we came like this close to playing because we had a kind of regular group, and then that group kind of dissolved a bit. But we need to sort out something to play it. So yeah.
Yeah, because it is really good fun. And it's got all these different skill checks that you do, which have got different dice abilities that will power up. So you're going to roll a different die each time. But yeah, the Freelancer system, it's based on the Crossroads system, so it's used for things like Dead of Winter. There's a Pirates version. There's a Space version that's coming out in the not too distant future, which is rotting. But that one has, instead of having a dice rolling element, it has a deck building element.
Ooh, even better.
Yeah, that's a game that's going to take a lot of Ross boxes.
Yeah.
So we'll see how that pans out. But yeah, Freelancers, great game. Want to explore it a little bit more and play more, because I think we would have a lot of fun playing it.
Cool.
That's our number 5. So let's go into our number 4s. Our number 4, another game that came out last year. This is a game that you and I really enjoyed when we played it at AirCon. This is Kut no Hora, the City of Silver.
Yes.
Kut no Hora is a really interesting little game where you've got these different action cards you have in your hands. They have 2 different actions on each side. You're going to be playing one of them down each turn, or play 2 down each turn, to try and trigger the different actions, which are about building this town based on this sort of silver currency. But the actions that you take, whether it's taking plans for buildings, actually building those buildings, tending to your income and all that sorts of things, are going to be impacted by the general populace. So it's kind of a civilization building game, almost like Town Builder.
Yeah.
But you have this deck of cards that runs through, which affects production and town resources. So the more people come to the town, the cheaper resources are going to become, more people that come into your town, the more expensive resources are going to go because the demand will go up. But the more that you produce, the cheaper it's going to go. And all of your currency is based on, you just have money, which is just your resource. The value of money that you have and the resources you have to pay depends on the value of the resource at the time you're doing it. So if you want to build something, you need a certain amount of wood, say 3 wood. You have to pay 3 times the value of wood at that moment, which could be anything from 1 to 5, I think. Yeah. We've never got it to 5 because people keep building things to produce wood. So we can bring that price down. But it's a really interesting economy that you have to keep an eye on. Because if you heavily end up investing into one of your guilds that your opponents don't have, you could really get a lot of income out of that, which is deeply satisfying to have. I think that happened in one of our games where I went, oh, cool, I can just really focus in on this.
Yeah.
No one else is touching it.
Yeah.
Massive income happened each time we played it. So it's a fun little game. There's some procedural elements that you're building in the background, which give you some fun little bonuses. There's a tax element.
Yeah.
Taxes aren't always fun in board games, but it actually does make this kind of interesting because there's a whole reputation track that's important to end game scoring. It's just a lot of fun. I haven't played it for a really long time. I really want to get it back to the table because it is very, very good. And yeah.
It's a game which I would say more is more. So usually I'm a very big advocate of less is more, right? Because you end up with where you have what would be a really good like core component to a game, and then they kind of tack on all these extra bits, and you're a bit like, oh, they just distracted it from what was like the good or interesting bit in the game. But actually, with Good No Horror, it's just like, hey, we've got this really cool like resource or market mechanism here. We've got this really cool, card action selection based off the cards. We've got this really interesting, like the artwork's really nice. So it's just like it's like all these little tiny bits that should work really nicely together.
Yes.
And I think if you do remove one of those pieces, you then some of the other stuff then loses some of its shine as well a little bit. So
absolutely,
it's a really good example of where they kind of they've done a really good job of putting together all the small components or mechanisms within the game. So yeah, I really, really like it. Yeah, we should definitely play again soon.
Yeah, yeah. I think the only thing that they did mess up on is the box art, because all the art on the board is actually really, really pretty.
I was trying to not mention it, but yeah, I was trying not to go there. But yeah, it's so funny because if this was literally on a shelf, you'd walk past it like 9 out of 10 times.
Yeah.
But if they had the game like set out on a table to display, you'd probably be picking it up 9 out of 10 times, right? So they kind of missed the window there a little bit because it's so colourful. This is the crazy thing; it's so colourful in that box. But anyway, yeah.
The detail of the box is great, but from a distance, it's just a big silver coin. So
yeah.
You're like, meh. What you got, Russ?
Hey, so you've given me the perfect little segue into this a little bit. So you just talked about a game where we like the components in the box, but now we're going to play a game where you don't necessarily like the components in the box, or at least the artwork. Maybe you find it a bit boring, which is Lisboa. So
yes.
I really, really, really like Lisboa. It's my favourite of the Lacerda games, big box games definitely. So it's a game where you are trying to reconstruct Lisboa after it had fires, tsunami and earthquake.
1700s, where it had a terrible series of events that happened all at once. It was
Essentially, you have a hand of cards, you play a card, you draw a new card. The card that you play, you can kind of play in sort of one of two locations, either into your portfolio or into like a court to go visit a king or like the primary builder and all this sort of stuff. And then you've got a bunch of actions you can do. It's very kind of Lacerda-y from that perspective, I guess. And you can either, build ships or produce goods or trade those goods, or you can contribute towards the building rebuilding of Lisboa. I like it because you can kind of get on, and I'll talk about this quite a lot particularly with the Lacerda games, but a couple of other games as well. You can kind of get on that journey at any point in that cycle. So sometimes a game has a very defined flow, and obviously that can be quite frustrating in a game where, usually in like a worker placement game, that's very frustrating, but less so in this, obviously, because you're playing cards. But yeah, it's just quite nice because you can kind of get on anywhere. You can choose a strategy behind it a little bit. I think that's probably that's really what I'm saying here, is you can focus on getting buildings out and rebuilding it, or you can actually just probably spam goods and then just sell them and just gain some points from that, right? So there are some options in there. But the art, I really like the artwork. It's got a very washed out, almost kind of white to blue, kind of marble-esque kind of look to it, I guess, a little bit. But yeah, I just think it's just again, like I said a minute ago, kind of really clean design in the sense that you can get on anywhere in that journey. The fact that it's relatively simple to explain. I think it is there's a big hurdle to get over I'm placing the card to do this thing, but once you get past that initial bump, a very simple game to kind of get that behind on the strategy, I think. So just good, really, really good, really, 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 really good.
Yeah, I like this bar. It was number 65 for me when I did this list.
Outrageous.
So it's my second favourite of the Lacerdas behind Weather Machine. Yeah, I do like the mechanisms. I think it's good. It's a good time. I don't think I've ever lost with Boa in the few times that we've played it from memory.
Maybe? Yeah, I don't know.
But certainly quite high, close scores at the very worst.
I can look up.
It was, yeah, I like it. It's a good game. Like I said, I don't really like the artwork. I think it's a little dull. When you look at some of the other games that Ian O'Toole has done for Lacerda, there's a lot of colour that sort of pops on those boards. And sometimes the colour pops on it, but a lot of the time, like the cubes, for example, the colourful cubes do pop on the board.
Yeah.
You can sort of see what's going on there. But the Regency cards don't.
Yeah.
It's just that it's a little bit too dull for me, so yeah. I understand where you're coming from, though. I do get it, but it's
interesting. You mentioned around Weather Machine being, your more preferred from this list, because obviously that was almost the one that came into my mind when I said about where you can't get on that journey necessarily at any point. Weather Machine, I find because there's at least 2 or 3 actions which I think are you have a prerequisite before it, really.
Yeah.
Which makes it a bit sort of a slower roll, and I feel like you're forced more down. Maybe I need to play Weather Machine a bit more to kind of suss it out, but I feel like you're forced down the strategy there is slightly narrower, I think.
A little, but I mean, the last time we played it, I jumped onto the engine because I was last, so I couldn't get into the spot where everyone else was starting, so I had to go somewhere else, and I started, and I ended up winning that quite significantly. Yeah. So I don't know if it was just luck in that aspect, or whether I managed to make things work a little bit better. But hey, that's what happened. That's our number 4. So let's go into our number 3s.
So my number 3 is actually a game which I think has crept up the list more because I played quite a lot of it solo, actually. So I was really keen to try to find some solo games to play. And I don't know why, because there's no real need. Do you know what I mean? Like, I just was like, I should play more solo games, but that thought didn't really come from anywhere. It just popped into my brain. But I was really struggle with solo games because I find like I set something up, set up for like, takes me like 20 minutes to set up a game, then I play it for like, whatever, 5 minutes, and then I pack it down again or something silly, right? And I think now I've got a bit of space to play some solo games. But I think this is maybe a better solo game than it is multiplayer, I dare say. So this is Imperium. Now, I've put down Imperium Horizons on the list, but this includes Classic and Legacy. So Legends. Yeah. So you pick a civilization, you have a deck, a starting deck of that civilization. You're essentially trying to score points and contribute towards the end of the game, but you're doing a little bit of deck building in there, which is good. Horizon adds a little bit more player interaction in the form of trading posts, so you can actually go and trade goods with other people. Each of the boxes has a whole heap of new civilizations you can play as, but you can pick up like any box basically, and you kind of got your complete game. They're not necessarily like expansions, which I think is also quite a good concept in that. The challenge I have with it multiplayer is it's quite a slow game. So if anyone has any kind of AP in the game, it feels like it drags on forever, and I'd love to figure out a way of getting it to a more simultaneous play situation. But as a solo game, and particularly on the revised stuff that they added in on Horizons, it's a much better game, I think, and I really enjoy playing it solo. I've just recently found there's a fan-made but developer-supported
semi-authorized
kind of expansion where you basically are like campaigning across the world. So you pick a civilization and there's a map, and then you fight one of the other civilizations adjacent to that, and when you defeat them, you then take them, and then you move on to the next place. So you can keep moving across the world.
Oh, that's fun.
Quite a cool concept, because otherwise it's a bit, I don't know, it adds a very light, campaign-esque version to it. But yeah, I really, really enjoy it. I mostly like the flexibility or the options you have when you start in the game, because you can come in and there's I've got all of them now, but there must be like 30 odd civilizations you can pick from, and they all play very differently. So yeah, I'm interested to hear your thoughts.
So it's a game I played, I played back on the channel actually, the Imperium Legends, and I then sold it because it was one of those things of like, oh yeah, I enjoyed this, and then it wasn't getting played, so I thought, let's get rid of it. And then about 3 months after I sold it, you then went, oh, I'm interested in this. Like, oh, for God's sake.
Classic.
You're right, it's very slow. That's my biggest problem with it, is that at multiplayer, anything over 2 players, it's a very, very slow game, and it's a bit of a slog to get anything done. Because you're effectively, each turn you're playing 3 cards in order to do something. The only way I think you could speed that up is if you each played your hand and then you did the various actions and chain things, but things might change in between.
That's the problem, is because you're interacting with a common market together that you can't. And you have some attack cards as well, which might force people to like discard a card or something like that. So
I think it also suffers a little bit from the problem I have with things like Root, where you've got all these different factions. They broadly do the same thing, but they function in different ways, and they have slightly different conditions for winning. So like the Vikings, for example, they have pretty much all red cards. I can't remember what they call
Unrest.
Unrest cards. They have all those. They have all the Unrest cards, and they have the pillage and less things. But they don't have as many civilization cards. They sort of build those up as time goes on.
Yeah.
But it means that you then can't trigger the civilization cards. So if there's certain cards that come out in the market that are specifically, you need to be at this certain level of civilization in order to activate them, you can't do it.
Yeah.
And your deck might force you into certain directions that you just can't deal with the common market, and it just becomes impossible to do anything with.
Yeah. So just for explanation so people can follow, you start off in like as a barbarian civilization, and so you can only play cards which have the barbarian icon on them, but eventually via gaining cards by progressing, basically by getting victory points, essentially you progress up into a civilized. I think it's just civilized.
Yeah, I think it's civilized.
Civilized civilization. But that means then you can play civilized cards, but you can no longer play a barbarian cards unless some cards have like a bit of a crossover on it. But it means that at some point you switch your deck over a little bit, or you're trying not to stack your deck with one thing or the other, which is why I like it, because I think it is probably one of the better use cases for like a deck builder in a sense, because you're actually having to continually manage that deck rather than just like, I'm just going to keep dumping the one thing that I need into this deck. Like with Dominion, no diss on Dominion here, but you'll be like, I'm doing like a action and card draw combo kind of deck, right? So you have cards which literally just draw you more cards to give you more actions to draw more cards, and that's how you build your deck. And you don't ever really then evolve that deck beyond that. And obviously this gives you an opportunity to do that. But you're right, it does mean that you might fall into a trap where you can or can't do certain things depending on when that gets triggered. People might be introducing unrest cards, which is basically like dead weight into your deck. There's also some weird factions which like flick between the two, so there's like some interesting, but you have to be conscious of what other people can do a little bit. There's the cultist faction, which have like a whole other separate like win condition, where essentially they're trying to like raise a Cthulhu or whatever, right, kind of esque thing. And so you're trying to have to keep an eye on what they're doing. It's also interesting because you can kind of end the game in one of two ways, which is you get through all of like the victory point cards and then you see who wins. Hey, great. Or there's so much unrest that you empty the unrest pile, and then whoever has the most unrest loses, I think it is. And then everyone else just kind of like ties off from memory. The asynchronicity of it can hold it back a little bit. And it's one of those games where if you play it a lot, you will know what's going on, but you have to commit the time to play it a lot. Which is, again, why I think it's good solo.
I think playing it solo is probably the way in order to do that.
Yeah.
I think it's then a struggle to play multiplayer because it takes so long to actually get things done. You just sat there going, I'm kind of bored whilst this is happening, which is a bit of frustration. And it does suffer from the skill level thing, I think. If you've got a more skilled player, you're more likely to win it. But anyway. My number 3, getting a little bit more positive now, is Darwin's Journey.
Ooh, okay, yes. Yeah.
This is a worker placement game where you are following Charles Darwin and his journey through the Galapagos and different islands, where you're discovering different fossils and trying to feed into that scientific aspect. And you do this by having assistants that you've drafted at the beginning of the game. They have different specialties in terms of seals and knowledge that they have gained throughout this time that they're there. And you build this knowledge bar up so that the higher the seals that they have, the more actions or more powerful actions they are able to do. So you have this hand which will lead you into particular directions of what your characters can do. And then you're just going around doing different pieces on those islands and dropping off scientific discoveries to the museum, trying to score as many points in the books as you can. There's just a lot of really interesting combos that you can do because you can send off letters that you can draw away, and then that lets you do a different action. You can then put down a tent, for example. You've cleared out a tent, that lets you trigger another action, which lets you move around the board, which lets you do that thing, and you can have some really fun combo-y turns. It's a game I need to get to the table to play because I've been playing it a little bit on Board Game Arena, and I am terrible at it on Board Game Arena. My brain just can't process it the same way as it does when I'm on the table or when I was playing on Tabletop Simulator. For some reason, I don't know what it is. It might just be I've forgotten how to play. But it's just a really interesting system that I really enjoy. I love having those combos that play out from each other. It's got a little bit of that strengthening resources. So, like, the more powerful of an action, the better the action is. And those combos that come off the result of that are really, really satisfying when you can get them to pay off. One tip I will have is do not skip on the book track, because if you skip on the book track, you will lose out so many points at the end of the game. And that is devastating, because you're like, oh, I've got all these points. I've got 100. This is great. And then end game scoring goes and you lose by like 50.
Yeah.
And it's, yeah.
I have played it only on BGA, mostly with you, I think. And we played that first game, and I'm like, what the hell is going on in this game? And I did the classic thing, which I always do, which is I'm like, I'll just click stuff. And then halfway through went, oh, this is really stupid. Why did I not just learn how to play the game? But I found it really hard to learn, actually. Like, all of the, I'm sure, maybe I'm misremembering, but I'm sure all of the rules videos I saw on this were like an hour plus for the rules learning. And actually, I don't think there's a lot of smaller tracks or bits within the game. And I get why it takes so long, because you might spend like 10 minutes per thing, and then there's 6 things, so then there's your hour. But like, it's hard work to learn. But actually, once you're kind of in it, you're right. Most of it's comboing. So you kind of just do one thing, and then something else triggers off the back of it. And so long as you're... There's a very small risk you might like snooker yourself. If you haven't got the right seals on some of your assistants or later on that you gain access to. You might have a slower start. But I think it's quite good, and it's one you could play quite a few times and kind of maybe have a slightly more focus on one of the components within the game, and it kind of explore that, which is always quite good, because that's the stuff why you come back to playing a game, right?
It's got a huge variability in setup, because all the boss tokens are sort of spread out. The samples are spread out across the different islands. You've got the different assistants that you can have. You've got all sorts of little bits and pieces. There's a whole different map that I have as part of the collector's edition. Bunch of mini expansions you can throw in, little bit of modules, which is quite good fun. But it is one of those games that you kind of need to play a few times to really get your head around.
Absolutely, yeah.
And as you say, it does. The rules teach is in depth, but once you get it, it's just a case of this. Very Lacerda in that aspect, in that it's this thing does this, which does this, which does this. And you're sort of following those steps, and why you want to do those things is kind of key. That is our number 3, so let's get into our number 2s.
Oh, yeah.
My number 2 is a game that has dropped a place from last year because it's been supplanted. Paladins of the West Kingdom.
Oh, nice.
I know. So Paladins of the West Kingdom is a game that supplanted its predecessor, Architects of the West Kingdom.
Is this foreshadowing for what it was supplanted by, or...?
I mean, a little, but not huge. We'll get to that in a second. We'll get there. It's a game, worker placement game, where you're putting out these different workers defending the kingdom of the West. Francia, effectively, is what it was at the time. And you're putting out onto different action spaces to trigger off from this pool of meeples that you draft, that are all supported by this paladin that gives you bonuses to the little tier tracks that you have. So you have 3 different banner tracks that are representative of strength, faith, and another one, which I'll put on the screen because I can never remember them off the top of my head. And you're going to be putting those into play and triggering the actions based on the power of the strength. So each of the 6 actions on the right-hand side of your board are needing a certain level of one of your skills. I'll say skills for simplicity. Assets, attributes, I guess, is probably the best way of putting it. It needs one of them, and it will reinforce one of the others. So you might find that the convert action, it needs you to have a serious amount of faith, but it will increase your strength because you're going to convert these barbarians who keep coming in to attack your home, effectively. And you have to figure out how you're going to build these actions so that you can maximize what you're doing, getting the rewards from it, getting the various victory points, boosting up different tracks. You've got so many different options you can go down, different routes you can go down. There's always a card that is very good to play early, which is the Paladin that reduces the cost for building out huts. I can't remember what the specific hut is.
Just very quickly on that, just because otherwise I'm going to forget to mention it. This is probably my only, I think, bugbear with the game is because of the way that the cards are drawn. That might be the last card. So we played a game. It was 3 players. It was you, me, and Tom. Maybe Tom.
May have been Tom. It may have actually. It might have been against. It might have been with Alan.
Oh, maybe. Yeah, but both of you got that card early, and that basically like kickstarted your engine right out the gate. Whereas I think I got it in the second to last or last round, and it was a slog. And I was a bit like, this is kind of frustrating because basically, I'm at a handicap just because of the way that, and I have no influence around how those cards are drawn. So anyway, I just want to throw it in there because that was it is a very strong card, almost too strong maybe because it has such a big impact on the game. But yeah.
But it's one of those things, because the Paladin cards, we will draw one at the beginning of every round. But you draw, I say draw one. You draw 3, you choose one goes on the top of your deck, one gets buried at the bottom of it, so you never see it again. So you've got a little bit of future planning that you can put into there to plan things out. You're right, if it's shuffled and it just doesn't come up for you, it's a problem.
Yeah.
It can happen. But it's just one of those things.
I mean, it's part of the game. That's literally it. And I think, like I say, it's not about the way that component of the game works. That's fine. It's about that specific card. I think is just such a huge early game advantage that it just really can set you up or make it much harder. It didn't make it impossible for me. It just made it harder for me. That was all.
Yeah, it's a really good game. There's a lot of different things you can do in there. There's this suspicion track that you have based around taking taxes that you can do. So if you do a suspicious action, you can take taxes away. If you do that, you can trigger an Inquisition, which is not Spanish because we usually expect it coming. And we see who has the most suspicion on it. They get a penalty of some description and then throw away half their suspicion. They basically paid their debt to society, sort of thing. There's a lot of different things you can do in the game. I really enjoy it. I think it's a good fun. I need to play it more to justify playing with the expansion, because the expansion adds a whole other track into there, which I think when we played it on my stag, we just threw it in, and not many other people played the base game, and it was just a big distraction. It was like, well, this is a problem. So, yeah, Paladins of the West Kingdom is my number 2.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, it's good. Yeah, it's like, I mean, I've sort of thrown in my comments. It's my second favourite of them, and I think it is quite close to Viscounts, but it's really good, and it's kind of deck builder-esque almost a little bit, sort of. I like to say that because you do have some control over where you're putting them, because you do just go, well, I don't want to ever use this card, and it gives sort of that. It's almost actually like choose your own adventure. It's more like what it's kind of like for like vibe. Do you get what I mean? Like you're picking a path and you're like, I'm giving up with this path. I'm dumping it at the bottom of the deck. It's probably not going to come back around again. Anyway, good game. My Verb and Verb, which potentially outdoes cartographers, is the Guild of Merchant Explorers.
I knew this was going to be your number 2. I knew this was going to come up.
Basically, it's not really you're not writing necessarily. It's like a flippin' place, I guess, is probably the thing, which is why I say verb and verb on it. But basically, you've got a map, very similar to cartographers already, but you've got a map. It has different terrain types on this map, though, already set. And then you flip a card over of a predetermined 5 or 6 cards available to you of the base types of terrain, and then you place a cube on that terrain type. Awesome. Then you flip over the next card and you place another cube of the terrain type. And basically what you're trying to do is you're moving out from your central position, placing all these cubes, but at the end of the round you wipe all the cubes off and you have to start again. Now, hopefully, what you've done is you've completed all of the spaces within one type of terrain. So there'll be like usually 2 to 5 or something like that worth of the same terrain type clustered together. So if you put a cube on every single one of those, you can replace it with a village, and in the future you can then go off your villages as well as your central space. So you're slowly like moving out this map and exploring. There's ruins for you to discover. There's all these other bits. That on its own could be probably quite a repetitive game. Dare I say even maybe dull, because There's no variation. You could potentially work out a perfect strategy for each of the maps, because obviously the actual map sheets don't necessarily change, and you could end up with a lot of people just sort of doing the same thing on their turns. The sort of sweet spot is in each round, total round, there's one card that gets flipped over which lets you pick a different power, and the powers will be something a little bit more extraordinary, I guess, in the sense that most of the time you're just putting one cube on one terrain type. But with these powers, it might be like put one on a grass type and then put cubes surrounding it. Or it might be a really good one, going as far as you can in a straight line across water, basically. And it's those that really create the differences in how you play. We just literally completed a game where I was pretty much getting only grass powers coming up, and that really influenced the decision making I needed to make in the game, because I knew, for example, it was going to be really hard for me to get to explore a different part of the map. So there's a couple of good ways you can choose to score points. It's actually a game, I think, which I would encourage people to do a little bit of everything. Usually I would say in a game, you only kind of want to focus on maybe like one or two things as a broad stroke across all of board games when you're playing a game. But this is one where I'd be like, you want to make sure you explore those towers. You want to make sure you're hitting some of the treasure chests. You want to place some of the villages down. Make sure you want to link up some of the trade posts with the cities. You want to do a little bit of everything to really kind of maximize your point scoring. So, which is good because it means you're doing everything in the game and it's not complex at all. Literally, again, it's another game which is really easy to kind of explain to people. And in fact, you can kind of just start playing almost and be like, look, we're going to flip a card, we're going to put a cube, and then here are some things you can do with that, basically.
Yeah. I like how the trade market posts work, that you can place down cubes on, if you connect them up, you choose one of them that's going to work out, and you get the multiplier of the two numbers that is on there. So you get that nice little thing. So you can go, okay, I've connected my 2 and my 5. I'm going to put my 2 to pasture and then stick on my 5, and then maybe get that to another 3 or 4 or something, and keep spamming off that one. I always refer to this one as Kingdom Builder, the and right.
Yeah.
Because it's effectively the same thing as Kingdom Builder.
Yeah.
It does a lot of the same things. You just flip over terrain, do a thing. And I do like the varied powers and the varied maps. That gives it a lot of
the maps. And we talked about the maps. There's some variation in this.
But you've got different objectives which are for each of the maps, which is good, and different treasures will pop up each time. The thing I find with it sometimes is that you can just get screwed over by the terrain that comes out, which happened to me in one of the other games that we played of this in the last couple of days, which just meant that, well, I'm stuck on this island because I can't actually get out of here.
It's a risk mitigation. You have to plan for like the worst case, which means you can't always be maybe as efficient as you'd like.
Yeah, which is a shame.
Yeah.
So I actually I sold my copy to you, actually, now that I think about it, because Laura didn't like it, which is
Boo,
a
Laura.
straightforward enough reason to not have it. Tell her you said that.
I'll bring it on Friday.
My number one pick of all time.
Yeah.
No, it's number
two.
That was my number 2, so we're going to go into number 1s now. Yeah. Talk about number 1s.
My number 1, absolutely no surprise to anyone who's ever spoken to me about board games, is Tapestry. I am absolutely obsessed. So, Tapestry is... It's a Civ game because you have a civilization and there's some tech in there and there's some exploring and conquering of the map. But it doesn't really work like you might expect a Civ game to kind of work, in the sense that you're not really building your civilization kind of profile, if that makes sense, really. Like, you get that from the outset of the game. You get dealt a civilization card, you get dealt a capital sheet, which is like some terrain that you like might put some of your buildings down on. But ultimately, the game is really, you're progressing up one of 4 or 5 if you've got the expansion tracks. You're paying the resources of the particular track, then you're doing the action on there, and that might be gain a technology card or conquer a space, or it might be you place a tile down, or it might be that you get to move up one of the other tracks, or you put some buildings down and all this other stuff. So there's quite a lot of flexibility in the strategy you might pick. Some of it might be influenced by the civilization that you have at the start of the game, but not always, actually. So a lot of the time you've got quite a lot of flexibility in there, which I quite like. I think there's maybe only like 2 or 3 factions which I'd be like, or civilization, you have to go down this particular path, like the militants, for example. Obviously, go down the military track, right? But but otherwise, it's not too bad. So it's quite good because it means you can kind of bounce off a little bit of what other people are doing, because people will subtly influence your decision making. There's some landmarks which you get if you get to a particular space on a track first. Obviously, if someone else beats you to that, then you might want to maybe pivot and do something different. I really enjoy that it's a efficiency puzzle, essentially. There is a particular way you need to play Tapestry, and I will always, when I do a teach of Tapestry, I always then subsequently do like a quick 5-minute, here's a quick strategy guide, because if you don't know how to play Tapestry, and I mean play strategically, then you're probably not going to have a very good time. So because what you're really doing is your early game, you're kind of building up a bit of a resource engine, because if you don't do that at the end of the game, you won't have enough resources to really progress down the track, because the tracks get more expensive the further down the track you go. The only way you can get more resources is from an income turn, and the only way you can get resources on your income turns is by placing income buildings down. So there's some early traps you might fall into if it's the first time you play the game, where you have the choice between something like conquering a tile and gaining an income building, or gaining a tech card or an income building, and you go, oh, tech cards, well, tech sounds like it's an important thing I should be doing, I'll get the tech card early game, but then you don't have the income going forward, and you're missing out on like 4 resources during the course of the game. There's even minute details as well, where you conquer a space and you roll 2 dice. One of them has victory points on them and the other one has resources on them. And you might roll like a 7, which is the maximum you can get on that die, or a resource. And people always go, 7 victory points. Well, obviously I'm going to grab that. And then don't pick the resource. And then again, they're hamstringing themselves because they can't then progress down further tracks to get extra benefits. And for context, 7 points when you might end the game with like, on average, probably like 260 or 280 or something like that points, is obviously not a lot of points. You can get upwards of like 500 points in this game if you play like a almost perfect game. But yeah, I just like that there's a lot of flexibility in the setup. There's some variability in there, but the core of the game stays the same, which is you're moving down these tracks. And I just like that there's just enough. If there was too little of that, I'd be a bit like, you can play out the same stuff every single time and you wouldn't have to worry about it. If there was too much of it, you'd end up in a point where you lie with a route where you're like, what's this person doing? Why am I having to track what's going on with all this different, slightly different configuration we have in this setup? And I find it just hits down the middle of everything on that. It's almost, here you go, this is my final point on it. It's almost such a good game because it's so average. If that makes sense. Like, it just does everything so subtly well. It doesn't really, like, blow anything out of the water anywhere. It's just not overly complex, but it's not overly too simple. It just hits all of the sweet spots and everything down the middle. I'm like, combined, this is such a great game. This is why it's just number one for me, basically.
It's kind of like Cook the Horror in that aspect, where you take all those elements that come together and they sort of sing quite nicely. I think it's dropped off my top 50 for me because I overplayed it last year. Frankly, I played way too much of it, and I think the only way I really want to play it now is physically, because I want to play with... I've got all the expansion stuff.
Yes, exactly.
I can't do that on BGA necessarily. I want to actually play with that stuff I've got.
Agreed.
Because some of the new civilizations are more interesting. So we've got those different capital city pods.
And they did a rebalance pack, right, which helps quite a lot, because there were some civs which were... Craftsman, for example, which were just guaranteed strong. You pick that and you've probably got a really good chance, and they did a lot of rebalancing around that. And I know there's a bit of... It depends on how competitively you play. You can play with the base ones and not ever really worry about that. But if you want to play and have everything a little bit more balanced and a little bit fairer, I guess, going into it, then the rebalance pack kind of ticks all the boxes.
There's also one map which is significantly better than the rest, and then there were 2 which were just awful.
Yeah. And they fixed the 2 awful ones. Yeah, but
they didn't really balance off the super strong one, but that's okay. I do still really like Tapestry. I like playing it. I think it has it seems best at 4. And I talked about this a little bit when we talked about Castle of Burgundy, because at 2 players, very often the strategy is exploration and warfare. You go down those 2 tracks, and that is your best route to victory more often than not. Whereas in a 4-player game, you have a bigger map on the board, so going down exploration and warfare doesn't necessarily benefit you as well. So you can kind of spread out and do other things on the other 2 tracks, or the 5th one if you have the expansion. At 3, you have the same problem as at 2, that your best strategy is to go exploration and warfare, but there's a third person in there that's getting in the way, and if you're third, you're kind of screwed.
I think they're very different games strategically when you play them at 2 versus when you play them at like 4, even 3 really, but 4 or 5. Because when I come back, those landmarks, they can be really good like end of game scoring if you fill out your capital, but they're only really available at a 2-player game. You're only really going to be getting actually a lot of them to fill out your capital in a 4 or 5-player game. And this is why I'm not really sure about the 5-player, and I agree with the 4-player bit, particularly over 5-player, because you pick maybe 1 track each, so you can guarantee some of those landmarks. But that means you're only really potentially getting 3 landmarks versus 6 in a 2-player game, right? So yeah, I actually think I prefer a 2-player because it's a little bit more open. I think you can get away with a tech and science kind of track thing versus someone else.
Yeah.
But I think it's 2 or 4. I think those are the player counts, really.
Yeah, really. I think it's because, in my mind, it's because the military and the exploration tracks give you more resources more readily than the tech and the science
easier to
tracks.
progress early on. Yeah, yeah.
So it's a lot easier to sort of spam with that, unless you have a tech or a civ that works out pretty well. Anyway, yeah, like Tapestry, need to play it more physically.
Love it.
That's it.
Best game ever.
My number 1 game of all time is going to be. You kind of said that it's a little bit of foreshadowing and it's again supplanted it. It's not Viscounts of the West Kingdom, but this is Scholars of the South Tigris.
Okay. Yeah.
So Scholars of the South Tigris is a game where you are still part of those trilogies of Garfield games. You are now in the Middle East, where you are going through Baghdad, and you are trying to translate all these different scrolls of knowledge that have come through your door from all these different languages, bringing them back into Arabic. So you've got Greek, you've got Persian, you've got Syrian, you've got all these different things in there, Chinese as well, that you've got to try and translate them to develop the sciences. It's a very scientific age. And you're doing this with dice. So you're going to take your turns playing out different action cards that go down there, taking the dice that you have drafted into your pool, and you've taken out a bag, rolled them. The value and the colour of the dice makes a difference into the power of the actions. So it's a difficult game to try and explain without having it in front of me to give examples, but effectively if you roll a 5, that is on a white die, that is just colourless, and it will just do a strength of 5. Certain actions will allow you to research into a particular research track, so if you roll a blue 3 and a white 5, you can mash those together. The blue takes priority over the whites. You end up with a blue 8 that goes to the action. It then becomes a power of 8 to do that action. What I like is that as these researchers develop and you translate in scrolls through them, they will eventually retire by paying them enough gold. They go under your player mat, and they will become an extra bonus action that will help with it. So you're kind of building your engine a little bit from that as well. And I like that it's more open than some of the other games that have come from Garfield, but it's far less open than Wayfarers of the South Tigris, which a lot of people seem to really love. With this, you have a lot more control over what's going on. You've got ways to manipulate your dice that is always very satisfying. You've got primary and secondary coloured dice that you can sort of mix in as they go through. You've got white dice which you can just supplement if you need to. You've got different actions that can help you increase the die value. The different tracks give you different things when you go to different income stages, and there is a particular, there are certain tracks that are more beneficial to go up early, like the green and the blue tracks, for example, because blue gives you more dice into your hand. Green lets you bump up another track, which is always very satisfying to do. But you have your own little private objectives, and you have your own different scorings based on the scrolls that you translate. So you might want some particular scrolls to work out for you. So yeah, I really like it. I really like the variety that you have in the actions. I think it's relatively straightforward to explain. I know that you have problems with the speaking, and it doesn't feel like...
Yeah, I'm being very patient here, yeah.
I know it doesn't feel like you're necessarily translating things, but let's be honest, a lot of times does it actually feel like you're doing the thing.
Yeah.
In board games, I don't think that's necessarily a ding against it. It's very mechanism driven. Like, I don't feel like I'm exploring Kut Nahora and actually mining when I go and do the mining part of it. I'm not looking at dragons in Wormspan, although I am, but I'm not.
Yeah.
Sort of thing. So
this
that's
is
kind of it.
Yeah, this is the thing that creeps up a little bit now. Like recently, I actually played Terraforming. We played Terraforming Mars, and I'm a bit like you could play Terraforming Mars and not really terraform Mars, and then you can like win the game.
Yeah.
And I find that weird a little bit. But so it's just not. But it's not as bad as that. In fact, I think I narrowed it down as you're talking. I think it's mostly I don't know, the way my brain is wired. I just can't interpret the translation process, and that really is jarring for me when I'm playing the game. So you'll have, like you say, you have like the scholars. So one will be like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of what they'd be. Sanskrit to Hebrew.
Greek.
And then, Hebrew to Greek, and then so on and so forth. And you're trying to get through to Arabic. And I'm like looking at these cards, and I think last time as well, I didn't have to, I was playing upside down. So I was trying to read the cards upside down as I was going. But I'm looking at them, and I can't make that link. I just can't do it, and it should be so simple. It should be literally the simplest thing there. There's only 6 cards, maybe maximum or whatever, really like out in front of me, but I can't follow the path through, and it really. I spend so much of my mental capacity trying to just calculate the path through that journey, and more efficiently as well, because you might find one, and it's like because you've got to pay gold to other people. And you're potentially like retiring their ones, or maybe you're doing that to your own one. But I'm just trying to I just really can't get my head around it. And I really enjoy playing the game, but it's a really weird thing because at the end of it, I'm like, this game's really like pissed me off. I'm like, I can't I'm just frustrated with this play. But then you'll be like, hey, do you want to play this? And I'll be like, hell yeah, this sounds like it should be really good. And then I just back through that cycle again. So I really, really want to enjoy it. And I think I can. And maybe I just need to find out, maybe I literally need a pad of paper with me or something like that when I'm playing, just so I can write down the names and make sure I'm tracking it through. And I don't know if it's like, I mean, I'm not really dyslexic, but it's almost, that's what it feels like. It feels like, it reminds me of the kind of games where like some people will be really good at like memory matching games or something like that. And that's just like and I feel like in a game like this, that sort of thing shouldn't impact. In fact, we talked about it last time, which is I feel like there should have been a more common path through, and that made it much easier to interpret. So, like for example, Sanskrit, I can't remember how I was thinking this now, but I'm going to continue with my train of thought. Sanskrit always translates into Greek or something like that, or there was it was this. There was levels. There was like 4 levels. There was like 2 languages per level, but you always knew that these 2 went into one of these 2, and one of these 2 went into one of those 2, and then it just meant it was just a bit easier to interpret and understand that path through. But yeah, that's literally it. That's just one thing, but it was so frustrating. I don't know why, but it just really got under my skin every time I've played. I'm like, I can't. Everything else, I love the dice bit. I love all of the options you have around it, the sort of strategies you can follow because you've got the different tracks going on it. But it's just really like just takes it out of me, literally. Yeah.
I wonder if you say maybe a notepad, or maybe actually what we just need to do is just put some meeples on them to just say,
yeah,
hey,
maybe,
this guy. You can follow the track from this guy through to this guy. It just helps you visualize it a little bit better. That might be something that works out, because I do think if you got your head past that bit, I think you would enjoy it.
Oh yeah, absolutely, I agree. Yeah, I absolutely agree. Yeah. I think I really enjoy it.
Yeah, so maybe we just try that next time we play it. So that is it. Those are our favourite games of all time. Those are our top 5. What do you think of our games on this list? Let us know in the comments below what games fit into your top games of all time. We did. We finally got here just in time for Christmas to buy some more games.
Pretty much.
And maybe we'll do another video which is our favourite games that have come out since we played this. So that might be something we do at some point.
Yeah.
Until then, thanks everyone for watching. Subscribe if you haven't already. Check out some of the other content we're doing on here, which is not just board games anymore. We're doing some other fun stuff.
Nice.
And we'll see you again soon. Thanks everyone. Merry Christmas if it hasn't already passed. Bye-bye.
Bye.